You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. Here we go. Hello and welcome to DIY Therapy. As always, we'll start with our disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not designed to diagnose or treat. When beginning any exercise program, it should be reviewed and discussed with your medical professional prior to beginning. Information on this podcast is not designed to replace medical treatment. My name is Will. With me, as always, is Andy.
What's up?
What's up, dentist boy?
Dentist boy.
I don't know.
Sugar withdrawal boy.
Oh, yeah, you got a lot of things going on, don't you? I forgot about that.
Yeah, my life is in all disarray right now. So heads up to the listeners. Currently have a tooth that doesn't seem to be cooperating very well. I've got another appointment today, so if I'm slurring my speech or grimacing or screaming ow in the middle of this.
Good news, a grimace is more of a facial expression, so they won't be able to see that.
We should broadcast this thing on Skype.
That is a terrible idea. I'm in nothing but my underwear.
What? That is not true. I see you right now.
Well, when I'm downstairs, though.
Now everybody knows that you're lying.
Do they?
I don't know.
One of us tells the truth and one of us always lies, kind of thing.
I wonder which one they'll figure out is doing which. Tough one there.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then I'm going through my sugar withdrawals here. So I gave up sugar for Lent, and that's a terrible idea. Awful idea.
It depends on how much sugar you were imbibing before.
Would you like to describe to them my eating habits?
All right. Imagine an Oompa Loompa that lives in Willy Wonka.
Oompa Loompa. And
they have nothing in there to eat but candy. That's about it. You basically are living inside of Willy Wonka's factory. You're surrounded by a world full of just nothing but candy stuff. And so that's what you're surviving on.
So that kind of explains the dentistry issues too?
Maybe. I am not a dentist. I can't speak about that.
Yeah, I don't know the correlation between like the actual research with sugar and cavities. I'm sure it's
I only know what the
dentist.
Gotta be? I only know what the dentist tells me.
And which is?
Stop eating so much sugar.
That's all we got. All right, well, this was a good podcast. All right, we'll see you later.
Well, we got to talk about back pain.
Oh, back pain.
Ooh, not tooth pain, back pain.
Yeah, back pain. Yeah, so let's see. We kind of you and I talked about this off script here or off camera podcast
script,
night,
like
whatever we're calling it. But we really didn't touch upon, back pain specifically in like the younger population, which happens to be more of the demographic that listens to podcasts. So we thought, hey, maybe that would be a good idea, especially considering back pain affects, 9 out of 10 people in their entire lives. It has, there's 130 million Americans that have back pain each and every year, with about 25% of those ending up being chronic pain. So, hey, this may be a kind of big topic that we should discuss.
Yeah, you don't want to go down that chronic pain. Well, that's a bad one to go down.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but we also have a patented product that actually treats back pain, which we never actually discussed either. So
no, we need to.
Yeah. So so back pain, okay, and back pain specifically in younger individuals under really the age of about 65. So back pain is really going to be caused. The majority of back pain issues are going to be caused by what we would consider an asymmetrical disc pattern. Okay.
What?
Yeah. So a little bit of anatomy here. We have the spine itself, which is made up of the vertebral bodies, which is the bones, right?
Yeah.
And then in between those bones, there is a disc. That disc is gelatinous in nature. It's pliable. It has contents in the middle of it that is able to be redistributed within the disc. So, if you put certain pressures on the spine, certain patterns on the spine, it's going to actually push some of that disc in different directions, and it's able to be manipulated over time, right?
I always describe it as a jelly-filled donut.
That's right, the classic jelly-filled donut.
Or pudding-filled, or whichever
you want. Bavarian cream?
Yeah.
Whatever.
They're all good.
Yeah. So essentially what ends up happening with this is, and this doesn't, and this is a little confusing point for people, is people hear, okay, disc problem, okay, and they immediately think of bulging disc, herniated disc, sequestered disc. These are all things that you'd hear on like an MRI or something of that nature, or prolapse disc. These are all terms that you would hear on an MRI. An asymmetrical disc pattern does include all of those things, but it also includes just the fact that you could put enough pressure on one side of the disc just to make it lopsided, to where there is no damage to the disc. There is just strictly a asymmetrical pattern to it. So let's use this as a practical example. If we're sitting, say, for 3-4 hours, okay, at our desk, we've got a desk job and we're just kind of honed in and zoned in. We're not even getting up to, use the restroom, and we're sitting in a poor posture. That's actually going to compress the front end of the disc, okay? The way that the mechanics of the spine works. The spine bends forward, the front end of the disc is compressed, and over a period of time, a lot of that material within the disc will actually start to shift backwards. Now, this in and of itself is not a problem. This is actually how the spine is supposed to work. It's actually designed in this manner. Where it becomes problematic is when it's so repetitive that those contents or the disc itself starts to become irritated on the backside of the spine. And this is, or spends way too much time manipulated on that backside of the spine. And so what this does is it starts to occupy space where there just isn't any space that occurs, right? Or there isn't enough space there. So think of it as it starts to kind of move into the territory of where the nerves moves into the territory of where the muscles, the ligaments all already occupy. And now you have continual stress, micro traumas to those tissues because you're having just repetitive strain placed on those tissues. And this is where the majority of low back pain comes from. Okay, now those, if you continue down that path, those do lead to some structural changes, things that you do find like on an MRI, again, those discs bulge, herniations, etc. Now, the great thing about all of this stuff is that it is reversible. Okay, we've talked in previous podcasts how disc bulges, herniations, those are actually reabsorbed into the spine if they are corrected in some manner, but they're also just the asymmetrical pattern. So let's say you go to that first phase where it's just asymmetrical, but you're not into that second phase where you're starting to get a true disc bulge or herniation, which are more structural issues. So phase 2 is more of a structural issue versus just a phase 1, which is a asymmetrical pattern. And so if we are, those things are, the asymmetrical pattern is very easily changed. It can be changed within, several hours, several movement patterns, etc. And first of all, Will, anything you want to add to any of this? I'm just kind of rambling here, as I typically do.
I'm marveling at it. It's pretty impressive. Basically, the takeaway is that you spend too much time in a bent over position where you're sitting, where your back is not in its normal position, or you're bending over a lot, like say you're at work or whatever. Basically, the jelly is going to move towards the back, which is normal, like you said, but you keep doing it without kind of correcting it. It's going to just, like anything, is just going to kind of end up there. And you can move it, but you have to, I was going to say it's not overly complicated, but you also have to be aware of what you need to do.
Yeah. So like a couple things that I think are important to understand is like, okay, so let's define the different positions of the spine. There's flexion or forward bent, like bending over. Okay, so that's just the spine bending forward. There's extension, which is bending backwards. And then there is kind of what we would consider like a neutral spine position. So your neutral spine position is typically where we're at in kind of a standing position. And so if you look at the majority of people, and when I say the majority, I'm talking like 95% of the patients that come into the clinic under the age of certainly under the age of 50, maybe 75-80% of the patients under the age of between 50 and 65 all feel better, or their symptoms actually are better in a standing upright position versus a sitting position. Okay, so standing upright is typically kind of this neutral position for individuals. Okay, so there's neutral position, then there's extension, bending backwards, and then there's forward flexion, bending forward. So kind of those three different positions, right? And as it comes down to this is really a numbers game. That's simply what it is. And so, when we actually break down the numbers and look at what the research tells us, the research will tell us that the average person, this is average, so you've got to take a look at your life and think about how it kind of fits into everybody else's life, right? But the average person is going to bend forward in some capacity, so forward bend, flexion in some capacity, 3,500 times a day.
What?
Okay? Yeah. What? So that's a huge and ridiculous number, and most people don't think about it in that context because they kind of think of forward flexion as, hey, I'm bending over and touching my toes, or these very drastic movements. But the truth of the matter is, the majority of those bending forward movements actually occur in a seated position. So if you think about how you're positioning and whether or not your spine is flexed forward, bent forward, neutral, or even into a slight extended position, well, most of the time we all sit in kind of crummy posture, and it's actually in this bent forward position. So that if we lean just a little bit to the right, or lean and pick up a drink of water, those all count as another number of flexion, or another incidences of bending forward. So they all add up, and there's this cumulative effect, which then affects that symmetry of the disc. And so that's where the majority of the flexion comes in. So now if we look at how many times we actually extend or bend backwards, the average person only overextends 100 times. Okay,
I'm actually surprised that it's that high.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. Like, I actually think about it when I tell patients all the time, when am I actually overextending if I'm not purposefully doing it? Yeah. But that's what the research tells us. Okay, so overextending again is going past that neutral position when you're in a standing position. Okay, so the reality is that it is a 35-to-1 ratio forward bending to backward bending. Okay, and that's what the spine doesn't like. Okay, it's not that forward bending is bad. Forward bending is never bad. It's just the amount of time that we do it essentially forward versus the amount of time that we do it backwards. Okay. And this is where most of the time we've got to look at, like, right away, okay, what are we really doing in our lives that are creating more of this habitual pattern or movement pattern of bending forward, okay? And if we can start to change this ratio, okay, of how many times we're actually bending forward versus how many times we're bending backwards, then many times our pain levels level out, because that creates less of a symmetrical disc, right? So instead of that disc kind of sitting more in the backside of the spine, occupying space where ligaments, tendons, nerves are all sitting, okay, now all of a sudden we're getting more compression on the back of the spine from a mechanical standpoint, which pushes the disc more forward, taking that asymmetrical disc and making it more symmetrical, and taking that disc away from the irritated tissue on the backside of the spine. So it really just comes down to a numbers game. Okay, and the idea behind this is, okay, how can we essentially change that numbers game? So, any ideas, Will?
We could extend more often throughout the day, maybe?
Ding, 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 ding.
I have a winner!
We have a winner!
I'm going to Vegas, baby.
Yeah. Let me know how that goes.
It will not go well.
Have you ever been to Vegas?
No.
Have you ever gambled?
When I have gambled, it's basically roulette, and it's red or black.
Keeping it simple, huh?
I work too hard for the money. I'm not gonna just. I know that people enjoy it, and for them that's great. But for me, it's like I just don't see it.
I've only set foot on one gambling site when I was legal age to gamble, and I have never gambled. I'm the exact way. I'm like I just don't like my chances. In fact, when I play the lottery, I'm convinced I'm going to win, because I've never I consider that a form of gambling, and I only play when the lottery goes to this outrageous, and I'm like, well,
you're like everybody else.
I'm gonna be that story where obviously I never play, and then here I go winning the $600 million.
I want it all.
Which at that point I will buy an island with a golf course on it.
It's sort of like a Bond villain, but you don't want to be a Bond villain. You don't want to take over the world. You just want to own the island and just have a golf course on it, and that's about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. So you are exactly right. Bending backwards is really where you want to be, since we derailed there for a second. You can do this through several different exercises. There's lying on your stomach. That's a natural, just extended position. If you're having a lot of high pain, you can move onto your elbows, kind of up on your stomach and onto your elbows. That'll help kind of decrease some of that, increase more extension there. And then you can do like standing back bends too, or the prone press up, or the cobra stretch, which are all kind of standard extension based exercises, back bending based exercises. But really the big thing and this is something that I tell people all the time when they fall into this category, which again, it's a lot of people. The big thing is, the quickest way to get pain relief is to take away what's causing the pain. Okay. So, if you start looking at that ratio, I always tell people, if you're really correcting your posture, and this is an arbitrary number, I'm kind of making this up. I don't know the research on this. I don't know if there is actually research on this. I haven't been able to find any, at least. But if you're correcting your posture, remember we bend forward 3,500 times a day. Well, let's just say that takes away 1,000 times that we're actually bending. Okay, so now that's 2,500 times a day versus 3,500 times a day. So that's a 25-to-1 ratio. Well, what if we do back bends every hour and we're up 16 hours a day? Well, that's about 250 total back bends a day. And now all of a sudden we're at about a 10-to-1 ratio in terms of how much we're going forward versus how much we're going backwards. And that is something where the spine can actually start to heal, and you can start to get some pain relief because you're giving enough of a break on that tissue to where it's not, occupying that space, irritating the nerves, muscles, etc. And so that's what I always kind of give people as a goal, and again, I only break it down in numbers for some people who kind of like that or are going to gravitate towards that. But I think it's important that what's that?
Nerd
alert. But I think it gives people a target, right? Like, and a reason why we're actually having people bend backwards.
Yeah.
There's tremendous amount of value in understanding, hey, I'm going to ask you to do this exercise every hour, 10 times. Okay, this guy's nuts.
It sounds stupid. It sounds too easy. There needs to be more blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. But ultimately, this is just changing the habitual pattern and giving your tissue a break. And that's really where almost all rehab starts, is how do you give your tissue a break? Let it calm down and then build it back up.
Yep.
That's all I got.
Yep.
Boy, I was incredibly succinct for
you.
For me in general, but for being in pain too. My arm hurts from patting myself on the back though. So. Well, I was a little worried. I was a little worried. I'm like, oh, am I going to be able to concentrate here? But that's all I got.
All right. Well,
anything else to add? Any other pearls of wisdom?
I always kind of just always default to that because it's a good mental image of that stupid jelly donut. If you imagine you have a jelly donut between your two hands, your hands are the vertebrae, and if you squeeze it on one end, you can see it starts moving the jelly one way. If you squeeze it the other way, it just squeezes it back. So you just have to imagine that you're doing that. It's essentially that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Other than
yep.
that, I don't have any.
That's the classic easy way for individuals kind of grasp the basic mechanics of the disc.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Wrap it up.
This
podcast was for educational purposes only. It's not designed to diagnose or treat. When beginning any exercise program, it should be reviewed and discussed with your medical professional prior to beginning. Information on this podcast is not designed to replace medical treatment. Remember, treat yourself.